The morning sun hung low over the lake, casting a golden shimmer across the water that made everything feel like it was holding its breath. I was sprawled out on the deck of my fishing boat, Liberty, a beat-up but sturdy vessel I'd bought a few years back for a song. My legs were kicked up on the railing, a steaming mug of black coffee cradled in my hands, and the gentle lapping of the water against the hull was the only sound breaking the silence. Duke, my German shepherd, was sprawled out beside me, his big head resting on his paws, eyes half closed like he was contemplating the meaning of life, or maybe just dreaming about chasing squirrels. It was the kind of morning that made you forget the world's noise, the kind of morning I'd moved out here to chase. My dock stretched out from the shore of my private lake, a lake I'd poured my heart into, and everything felt right. That is, until the shouting started. "You need to move that boat immediately or we'll have it towed." The voice was sharp, cutting through the calm like a chainsaw. I sat up slowly, squinting toward the shore. There, standing at the edge of my dock, was a man I recognized all too well. Greg Burton, president of the local homeowners association. He was red-faced, his khaki shorts pressed to perfection, his polo shirt tucked in so tight it looked like it was strangling him. In one hand, he waved a clipboard like he was commanding a military operation, and behind him stood a gaggle of HOA members, all dressed for what looked like their weekly fishing party. They were a mix of middle-aged men in cargo shorts and women clutching mimosas, their faces a blend of self-righteous indignation and weekend boredom. They looked like they'd been waiting for a chance to flex their authority, and I was the unlucky target. I set my coffee down on the small table beside me, careful not to spill it, and stood up, brushing off my jeans. Duke lifted his head, letting out a low yawn, clearly unimpressed by the commotion. "Morning, Greg," I said, my voice calm but loud enough to carry across the water. "What's this about towing my boat?" Greg stepped onto the dock, his loafers clacking against the wood like he owned the place. "We've received multiple complaints," he barked, jabbing a finger toward Liberty. "This lake is under HOA control, and you can't park your boat here without a permit. You're in violation of community standards, and we're done playing nice." The crowd behind him nodded in unison, a few of them muttering things like "about time," and "he's been flaunting that boat for too long." One woman, whose name I vaguely recalled as Karen or maybe Carol, clutched her mimosa glass tighter, her lips pursed like she was personally offended by my existence. I glanced at them, then back at Greg, and felt a slow burn of irritation creeping up my spine. These people weren't just mistaken, they were delusional. They thought they could march onto my property, wave their little clipboards, and dictate what I did with my own lake. My lake. The one I'd bought, paid for, and poured years of sweat into fixing up. I took a step forward, locking eyes with Greg. "You're standing on my dock," I said, my voice steady but edged with steel. "And that lake you're talking about?" "I own it." The air went dead silent. You could have heard a fish jump. Greg's clipboard froze mid-wave, and the HOA posse behind him exchanged glances, their confidence wavering. Karen/Carol's mimosa glass tilted dangerously, a splash of orange liquid hitting the dock. "You what?" she gasped, her voice a mix of shock and disbelief. "I own this lake," I repeated, each word deliberate, like I was hammering nails into their assumptions. "The water, the shoreline, the dock, every inch of it. It's mine. Has been for years." Greg blinked, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. That's not possible," he stammered, but the crack in his voice betrayed him. He wasn't sure anymore. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, their fishing rods and coolers suddenly feeling like props in a play that was falling apart. I walked over to the side of Liberty, where a small waterproof lockbox was bolted to the deck. With a flick of my wrist, I popped it open and pulled out a rolled-up document. The edge is slightly worn, but the ink is clear as the day it was signed. My deed. I held it up, letting the morning light catch the paper, and watched their eyes dart from me to the document to each other. "This," I said, "is the deed to my property. It includes the lake, the land around it, and the right to tell you to get the hell off my dock." The crowd stared, jaws hanging, a few of them taking hesitant steps back. Greg's face went from red to purple, his clipboard now dangling uselessly at his side. I could see the gears turning in his head, trying to find a way to save face in front of his HOA minions. But I wasn't done. I stepped closer, the deed still in hand, and gave him a small, deliberate smile. "I think you should sit down for this, Greg," I said. "Let's rewind. A few years ago, I wasn't in a place to care about lakes or docks or HOAs. My life was a mess, tangled up in the aftermath of a divorce that had left me hollowed out. I'd spent 20 years married to a woman I thought I'd grow old with, only to watch it all unravel in a blur of arguments, lawyers, and paperwork. By the time the dust settled, I was 42, living in a rented apartment that smelled like mildew and wondering what the hell I was supposed to do next. I needed a reset, a place to rebuild, a place to breathe. That's when I found this property. It wasn't much to look at back then. Just a patch of overgrown brush at the edge of a newly developed community, a rundown cabin that looked like it hadn't been touched since the Nixon administration, and a lake so forgotten it didn't even have a name on most maps. The real estate agent tried to talk me out of it, rattling off reasons why the land was a bad investment, too remote, too much work, no resale value. But I didn't care about flipping it for a profit. I saw the lake, its surface glassy and untouched, framed by wild reeds and ancient oaks, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. I signed the papers that same day, handed over every dime I had left from the divorce settlement, and became the owner of a lake nobody else wanted. The first few months were rough. The cabin was barely livable, leaky roof, creaky floors, and a wood stove that belched smoke every time I tried to light it. But I didn't care. I threw myself into fixing it up, teaching myself how to patch drywall, replace shingles, and chop firewood without losing a finger. Every morning, I'd wake up to the sound of ducks splashing in the lake, their quacks echoing through the mist. Dragonflies danced across the water, their wings catching the sunlight like tiny prisms. I'd sit on the shore with a thermos of coffee, watching the world wake up, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The lake became my therapy. I'd spend hours out there, wading through the shallows, pulling out old tires and rusted cans that had been dumped years before. I planted native grasses along the shoreline to stop erosion, built a fish habitat out of submerged crates to give the bass a place to spawn, and even installed a small water filter system to keep the runoff clean. It wasn't just about owning the land. It was about caring for it, making it better than I'd found it. Eventually, I built a new dock, hammering every nail myself, and bought Liberty, a used fishing boat that had seen better days, but still ran like a dream. I named her Liberty because that's what this place gave me, freedom to be myself again. The community around me started growing while I was busy rebuilding my life. A developer had bought up the surrounding land, carving it into neat little lots for a suburban neighborhood complete with cul-de-sacs, matching mailboxes, and, of course, an HOA. I watched the houses go up, the families move in, the streets fill with minivans and kids on bikes. I didn't mind. I kept to myself, waving at neighbors when I saw them but never getting too close. My property was carved out long before the developer's plans, a little island of independence in the middle of their cookie-cutter world. I didn't have to join the HOA, and I didn't want to. My land predated their bylaws, their rules, their clipboard-waving nonsense. That was a fact most of them didn't know or didn't want to know. For a while, it was fine. The neighbors treated me like the eccentric guy in the woods, the one with the scruffy dog and the old boat. I'd hear them whisper about me at the gas station or the grocery store. "That's Mike Lawson, lives out by the lake, keeps to himself." I was okay with that. I didn't need their approval or their potlucks. I had my cabin, my lake, and Duke, who'd shown up as a stray one winter and decided I was his human. Life was simple, quiet, exactly what I'd been searching for. But then the HOA started sniffing around. It began subtly, almost innocently. A few of their members would show up on weekends, casting fishing lines from the public side of the lake's edge, just close enough to my property line to make me notice. I didn't say anything at first. I figured they were just enjoying the water, same as me. Live and let live, right? But then their fishing trips got louder, bigger, more organized. They called them HOA Fishing Social Sundays, complete with folding chairs, portable speakers, blaring country music, and coolers full of cheap beer. They'd leave behind a trail of trash, empty cans, plastic wrappers, even a broken lawn chair once, floating in the reeds or tangled in the grass I'd spent months replanting. I tried to be reasonable. One Sunday, I walked down to the shore, Duke trotting beside me, and politely reminded them that the lake was private property. "I don't mind you fishing," I said, keeping my tone friendly. "Just clean up when you're done, and maybe keep the music down." They nodded, mumbled apologies, and promised to do better. But the next weekend, it was the same story: louder music, more trash, and a few of them even started fishing right off my dock like it was a public pier. That's when I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. They weren't just careless. They were entitled. Things got uglier last summer when Greg Burton sent me a letter on official HOA letterhead. I found it taped to my gate, the paper already curling in the humidity. It accused me of mooring a non-regulated vessel on HOA property, my own boat, on my own lake, and claimed I was in violation of community standards. I laughed when I read it, thinking it had to be a joke. But the letter was signed by Greg himself, complete with his title in bold: President, Lakeside Estates HOA. He wasn't joking. He genuinely believed the lake belonged to the HOA, or at least he wanted to act like it did. I figured it was a mix-up, so I showed up at their next HOA meeting, deed in hand, ready to set things straight. The meeting was held in the community center, a sterile room with fluorescent lights and folding chairs arranged in rows like a budget church service. Greg sat at the front, his clipboard resting on a table like a scepter. I waited my turn, then stood up and explained that the lake was mine, had always been mine, and that their fishing socials were happening on private property. I offered to show them the deed, but Greg cut me off before I could finish. "We don't recognize external land claims without proper petition through the HOA board," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. External land claims. Like I was some outsider trying to scam them out of their precious lake. I left that meeting stunned. It wasn't just that they were wrong, it was that they were so confident in their wrongness. Greg didn't even glance at the deed. He didn't want facts. He wanted control. And from that moment, I knew this wasn't going to end with a polite conversation. The HOA wasn't going to back off. They were going to push harder, and I was going to have to push back. That brings us back to that morning on the dock, with Greg waving his clipboard and his HOA cronies glaring at me like I'd stolen their birthright. I stood there, deed in hand, watching their smugness crumble. Greg tried to recover, puffing out his chest and muttering something about escalation and permits, but the wind was out of his sails. The crowd behind him was starting to fidget, their fishing rods and coolers looking more like burdens than badges of authority. Karen/Carol took a nervous sip of her mimosa, her eyes darting to the deed like it was a bomb about to go off. "You're bluffing," Greg said finally, his voice quieter now but still defiant. "There's no way you own this lake. The HOA has managed this water for years." "Managed?" I raised an eyebrow, letting a hint of sarcasm creep into my tone. "You mean the beer cans I've been fishing out of the reeds? The plastic bags I've pulled from the shallows? That kind of management." A few of the HOA members looked down at their feet, clearly uncomfortable. One guy, a lanky dude in a fishing vest, started inching toward the back of the group, like he was ready to bolt. But Greg wasn't backing down. "You're in over your head, Lawson," he snapped. "This isn't your personal playground. This lake belongs to the community, and we're taking it back." I shook my head, almost pitying him. "Almost. Greg, you're standing on my property, threatening to tow my boat, and you don't even know what you're talking about. You want to talk about taking things back? How about you take your fishing party and get off my dock before I call the sheriff?" That got their attention. The word sheriff hung in the air like a storm cloud. Karen/Carol's mimosa glass tilted again, and this time a full splash hit the dock, staining the wood orange. The lanky guy in the fishing vest muttered something about not signing up for this and started packing up his gear. Even Greg hesitated, his clipboard lowering slightly, but his eyes still burned with that stubborn, self-righteous fire. I held up the deed again, letting the moment sink in. You want to see the paperwork? Fine. Let's go over it line by line. Or you can save yourself the embarrassment and leave now. Greg opened his mouth to argue, but before he could, I heard a low growl from Duke. He'd stood up, his ears perked, his eyes locked on the crowd. He wasn't aggressive, not yet, but he was making it clear he was done with their nonsense. The crowd took a collective step back, and for the first time, I saw real uncertainty in their faces. They weren't just dealing with me anymore. They were dealing with a man, his dog, and a piece of paper that proved they were dead wrong. Last chance, I said, my voice low but firm. Get off my dock, or we're doing this the hard way. Greg stared at me, his jaw tight, his clipboard trembling in his hand. For a second, I thought he might double down, try to bluster his way through. But then he turned, muttering something under his breath, and stormed off the dock, his loafers clacking louder than before. The HOA posse followed, their fishing rods and coolers dragging behind them like the wreckage of a failed invasion. Karen/Carol shot me one last glare, but it was weak, more petulant than threatening. I watched them go, the deed still in my hand, Duke settling back down beside me. The lake was quiet again, the water rippling softly under the morning sun. I picked up my coffee, took a sip, and leaned back against the railing of Liberty. For a moment, I thought that might be the end of it, but deep down I knew better. Greg Burton wasn't the type to let a loss go quietly. And the HOA? They were just getting started. This was only the beginning, and I was ready for whatever they threw at me next. The sun was climbing higher over Lake Lawson, its rays slicing through the morning mist like a promise of peace. I was back on Liberty, my fishing boat, tinkering with a loose bolt on the railing. Duke sprawled out nearby, his tail thumping lazily against the deck. The confrontation with Greg Burton and his HOA posse from a few days ago still lingered in my mind, but I figured they'd gotten the message. I'd shown them the deed, made it clear the lake was mine, and watched them slink off my dock like scolded kids. For a brief moment, I let myself believe the worst was over. I should have known better. Entitlement doesn't back down that easily, especially not when it's wearing khaki shorts and waving a clipboard. It started subtly, almost like they were testing me. The following weekend, I noticed a couple of HOA members fishing near the edge of my property line, their lines cast just close enough to my dock to make me raise an eyebrow. They weren't on my land, not yet, but they were pushing the boundary, daring me to react. I watched from the cabin's porch, coffee in hand. Duke's ears perked as he sensed my unease. Let it go, Mike, I muttered to myself. They're just fishing. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about fish. It was about control, about Greg and his HOA cronies refusing to accept that they didn't own every inch of this neighborhood, including my lake. The fishing trips grew bolder. By the next Sunday, their so-called HOA Fishing Social Sundays were in full swing. What started as a few guys with rods and a cooler had morphed into a full-blown event. They showed up with portable speakers blasting Garth Brooks, folding chairs arranged like they were tailgating, and enough beer to float a small navy. They didn't just fish from the public side of the lake anymore. They spread out, some casting lines right off my dock, others wading into the shallows where I'd spent months replanting native grasses. The trash was the worst part. Empty cans, plastic wrappers, even a soggy paper plate floated in the reeds, mocking the hours I'd spent cleaning this place up. My lake, my sanctuary, was turning into their personal party zone, and they acted like I didn't exist. I tried to be diplomatic. One afternoon, I walked down to the dock, Duke trotting beside me, and approached the group. There were about a dozen of them, laughing and clinking cans. their music so loud it drowned out the ducks quacking in the distance. "Hey, folks," I said, keeping my voice friendly but firm. "I don't mind you enjoying the lake, but this is private property. Could you keep the noise down and clean up when you're done?" A guy in a bucket hat looked up from his cooler, squinting like I'd just asked him to solve quantum physics. "Private property," he said, his tone dripping with skepticism. "This lake's been here forever. It's for everybody." I took a deep breath, resisting the urge to snap. "It's mine," I said. "I own it. The deed's clear. I'm just asking for a little respect." A woman nearby, her sunglasses perched on her head, snorted. "Respect? You're the one acting like you own the whole neighborhood." The others chuckled, egging her on, and I realized this wasn't going to be a conversation. They didn't care about facts. They cared about their Sunday beer buzz and their HOA-sanctioned power trip. I nodded, forcing a tight smile. "All right, just clean up, okay?" I turned and walked back to the cabin, Duke's low growl echoing my frustration. That night, I waded out into the shallows with a flashlight, picking up their trash, 6 cans, a plastic cup, and a fishing lure tangled in the grass. It wasn't just annoying. It was personal. They were spitting on everything I'd built here, everything I'd poured my heart into after the divorce. And they weren't going to stop unless I made them. The next week, it got worse. The fishing social turned into a spectacle. They brought a portable grill, the smell of charred hot dogs wafting across the lake. Kids ran around unsupervised, splashing in the water and trampling the reeds I'd planted to stop erosion. One guy even parked his truck on the public side of my property line, the tailgate down, blasting music like he was hosting a block party. I stood on my dock, watching them laugh and drink, their voices carrying over the water like they owned the place. Duke paced beside me, sensing my anger, his hackles raised. I wanted to march over there, yank their speaker out of the truck, and tell them to get lost. But I knew that's what they wanted, a reaction, an excuse to paint me as the bad guy. So I waited. I watched. And I planned. The breaking point came a few days later when I found a letter taped to my gate. It was on official HOA letterhead, the kind of paper that screams self-important bureaucracy. I ripped it open, expecting another passive-aggressive note about community standards. What I got was worse. The letter, signed by Greg Burton himself, accused me of mooring a non-regulated vessel on HOA property, my boat, Liberty, docked at my own dock on my own lake. It claimed I was in violation of community guidelines and demanded I remove the boat within 48 hours or face further action. There was even a fine attached, $250 for unauthorized use of communal water resources. I stood there, the paper crumpling in my hand, and laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd it bordered on insanity. They weren't just pushing boundaries anymore. They were rewriting reality, claiming my lake as their own. I called my buddy Frank, a real estate attorney who'd helped me with the divorce settlement years ago. I read him the letter over the phone, and I could hear him chuckling on the other end. "Mike, these people are out of their minds," he said. "They're accusing you of parking your boat on your own property? Do they even know what a deed is?" "Apparently not," I said, pacing the cabin. "Greg's acting like he's the king of the lake. They're not even pretending to check the facts." Frank's voice turned serious. "This isn't just a misunderstanding. They're trying to bully you into submission. You need to shut this down, hard. Show up at their next meeting, bring the deed, and make it clear they're messing with the wrong guy." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Yeah, I tried being nice. That's over." The HOA meeting was held the following Tuesday in the community center, a bland building with beige walls and a faint smell of stale coffee. I walked in, deed in hand, Duke waiting in the truck outside. The room was packed, probably 30 people, most of them HOA members, their faces a mix of curiosity and hostility. Greg sat at the front, his clipboard resting on a folding table like a judge's gavel. His wife, Cynthia, was beside him, her lips pursed, her eyes scanning the room like she was tallying votes. The other board members flanked them, a row of self-appointed royalty ready to pass judgment. I waded through the usual nonsense, reports about mailbox uniformity, complaints about someone's untrimmed hedges, until they opened the floor for community concerns. I stood up, holding the deed, and cleared my throat. "I'm here about the letter you sent," I said, my voice steady. "The one claiming my boat is on HOA property. Let's clear this up. I own Lake Lawson. The water, the shoreline, the dock, it's all mine. Has been since I bought the place years before your HOA even existed. I've got the deed right here, and I'd be happy to show it to anyone who wants to see." The room went quiet, but Greg didn't flinch. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Mr. Lawson," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "we don't recognize external land claims without proper petition through the HOA board. The lake has been used by the community for years, which makes it a communal resource under our bylaws." I blinked, stunned by the sheer audacity. "External land claims?" I said, holding up the deed. "This isn't a claim. It's a fact. The county recorder's office has this on file. My property predates your entire neighborhood. You don't get to rewrite history because you want a fishing spot." A few people shifted in their seats, whispering to each other. One woman, who I recognized as the mimosa lady from the dock, raised her hand. "If you own the lake, why haven't you said anything before?" "We've been fishing there forever." "Because I didn't mind," I said. "I let you use it because I'm not a jerk. But now you're trashing it, parking on my dock, and sending me fines for my own boat. That's where I draw the line." Greg cut in before I could continue. "This is a matter for the board to review," he said, banging his pen on the table like a gavel. "We'll schedule a formal hearing. Until then, I suggest you comply with the fine and remove your boat." I laughed, loud enough that it echoed off the beige walls. "Comply? Greg, you're out of your depth. You want a hearing? Fine. I'll bring the deed, the survey maps, and a lawyer if I have to. But let's be clear, you're not touching my boat, my dock, or my lake." The room buzzed with murmurs, some people nodding in my direction, others glaring like I'd just insulted their grandmother. Cynthia leaned over and whispered something to Greg, her face tight with anger. I didn't stick around for their rebuttal. I walked out, the deed tucked under my arm, and drove back to the cabin, my blood boiling. They weren't just wrong, they were arrogant, convinced their little HOA empire gave them the right to steamroll anyone who didn't bow down. I wasn't going to let that happen. The letters started coming after that. Every few days, I'd find a new one taped to my gate or stuffed in my mailbox. Notice of violation, obstructing neighborhood lake view. Fine, $100 for unauthorized dock maintenance. Warning, non-compliance with HOA waterway regulations. Each one was more ridiculous than the last, and none of them acknowledged the simple truth: the lake wasn't theirs. I started keeping the letters in a folder, knowing I'd need them if this escalated further. Frank told me to stay calm, document everything, and wait for them to overplay their hand. "They're digging their own grave," he said. "Just give them enough rope." I didn't have to wait long. The following Saturday, I woke up to the sound of voices outside, loud, confident, and way too close to the cabin. I stepped onto the porch, Duke at my side, and saw them, Greg and his HOA fishing crew, back in full force. This time, they weren't just fishing. They'd marched onto my dock, their lawn chairs set up, their coolers open, and their rods cast like they were staking a claim. Greg stood at the center, clipboard in hand, barking orders like a drill sergeant. "Set up over there," he told one guy. "We'll need space for the grill." I grabbed my phone, started recording, and walked down to the dock, Duke's tags jingling as he kept pace. "Greg," I called out, my voice cutting through their chatter. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" He turned, his face a mix of surprise and defiance. "We're exercising our community rights," he said, holding up his clipboard like a shield. "This lake is under HOA jurisdiction, and we're done asking for your permission." I stepped onto the dock, my boots thudding against the wood. "You're trespassing," I said, pointing at the crowd. "All of you. This is my property, and I want you gone." Now, the group froze, their confidence wavering, but Greg doubled down. "You don't get to dictate what the community does," he snapped. "We've got permits and we've got complaints. Your boat's in violation, and if you don't move it, we'll have it towed." I held up my phone, the camera still rolling. Towed? By who? You? Good luck dragging a 2-ton boat off a private lake. I pulled the deed from my pocket where I'd started keeping it for moments like this. "You want to talk permits? Here's mine. It's called ownership." Greg lunged for the deed, his hand swiping at it like a kid grabbing for a toy. I yanked it back, stepping out of his reach. "Don't touch my property," I said, my voice low and dangerous. Duke growled, his ears flat, and the crowd took a step back. "You know what, Greg? Let's settle this. Call the sheriff. You bring your permits, I'll bring my deed. Let's see who leaves in cuffs." His face went pale, but he tried to save face. "Escalation isn't necessary," he muttered, his clipboard trembling. "This is your final warning. Move the boat by tomorrow or it's gone." I laughed, loud and unapologetic. "You're gonna tow my boat? With what?" "Your golf cart." The crowd shifted, a few of them packing up their gear, clearly sensing this was going south. One guy whispered to his buddy, "I didn't sign up for a lawsuit," and started folding his chair. Greg stormed off, his posse trailing behind, but I could see the gears turning in his head. He wasn't done. Not by a long shot. That night, I installed security cameras around the dock, their red lights blinking in the darkness. I set up floodlights too, wired to a switch in the cabin. I wasn't going to be caught off guard. This was my lake, my home, and I'd fight for it with everything I had. The next morning, I woke to Duke barking, his deep, urgent growl pulling me out of bed. I grabbed my coat, slipped on my boots, and rushed to the window. The sun was just peeking over the horizon, painting the lake in shades of pink and gold. But what I saw on the dock made my blood run cold. Greg was back, and this time he'd brought a small barge crane on a rented flatbed boat. 2 men I didn't recognize were with him, shouting at each other as they tried to figure out how to hook Liberty to their equipment. They were actually trying to steal my boat, right there in broad daylight. I hit the floodlights, the dock lighting up like a stadium. "Get off my property!" I shouted, my voice echoing across the water. They jumped, startled, their faces pale in the harsh light. Greg turned, blinking against the glare, and yelled, "This is your last chance. We have HOA clearance." I raised my phone, already dialing the sheriff. "You've made a huge mistake," I said, stepping onto the dock, the deed in my other hand. I unfolded it, holding it up for the security camera I'd installed. "This lake is mine. County records confirm it. You're trespassing, and you're about to commit theft." One of the men with Greg, a burly guy in a work vest, stepped forward, his hands raised. "Wait a minute," he said. "This lake is under whose name?" Greg hesitated, then lied through his teeth. "It's communal. It's on HOA records." The worker frowned, clearly skeptical. "Then why does the county registry say it belongs to a Michael Lawson?" I raised my hand, the deed still in my grip. "That's me." Greg's face went white, his clipboard slipping from his hand. The workers exchanged glances, shaking their heads, clearly wanting no part of this. They started backing off, muttering about not getting paid enough for a lawsuit. But Greg wasn't done. Furious, red-faced, and humiliated, he kicked the dock railing in a fit of rage. His loafers slipped on the wetwood, and with a loud splash, the president of the HOA fell headfirst into the lake he swore he controlled. The crowd gasped, a few of them stifling laughs. I stood there, arms folded, Duke sitting beside me like a sentinel. Greg flailed in the shallows, his khaki soaked, his polo shirt clinging to him like a second skin. As he scrambled to his feet, something floated beside him, a plastic cooler, one of the ones his fishing party had brought. It bobbed in the water, and I noticed something inside it moving. My heart sank as I realized what it was: Greg's phone, probably full of his texts, plans, and HOA schemes, now sinking to the bottom of my lake. He climbed out, dripping and fuming, his hair plastered to his forehead like a wet dog. The fishing party was over, their chairs and coolers abandoned as they fled the scene. But as Greg stood there, water pouring off him, I knew this wasn't the end. He shot me a look of pure venom, his voice low and shaking. "You'll regret this, Lawson." I didn't flinch. "Get off my land, Greg, and take your trash with you." He stormed off, his posse trailing behind, their fishing rods dragging like the remnants of a defeated army. I watched them go, the lake settling back into its quiet rhythm, the water rippling under the morning sun. But I wasn't naive. Greg's fall into the lake wasn't just a humiliation, it was a spark. The HOA wasn't going to let this go, and neither was I. They'd crossed a line, and I was ready to draw a harder one. This was my lake, my home, and I'd fight to keep it no matter what they threw at me next. The morning after Greg Burton's spectacular plunge into Lake Lawson, the air felt different, like the calm before a storm is coming. I stood on my dock, coffee in hand, watching the ripples on the water settle back into their quiet rhythm. Duke lay beside me, his ears twitching at the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface. The HOA fishing crew had left behind a mess: empty cans, a soggy paper plate, even a broken folding chair half sunk in the reeds, but their absence was a small victory. Greg's humiliated exit, phone sinking to the bottom of my lake, should have been the end of it. I'd shown them the deed, called their bluff, and watched them scatter. But I wasn't naive. People like Greg don't slink away quietly, and the HOA was a machine fueled by pride and pettiness. I knew they'd be back, and I was ready. The first sign of trouble came 2 days later when I found a certified letter nailed to my gate like a declaration of war. It wasn't from Greg, though. It was from his wife, Cynthia Burton, now the interim HOA president. The letter was thick, official, and written in the kind of legalese that screams, "We're trying to scare you." I sat at my kitchen table, Duke curled up by the door, and tore it open. The words hit me like a punch. "Dear Mr. Lawson, you are hereby summoned to attend a mandatory disciplinary committee hearing regarding multiple violations of community peace, safety, and the improper use of shared community spaces." The date was set for Friday at 6 p.m., the location was the HOA Community Hall, and the consequences for not showing up included fines and possible legal escalation. Signed, Cynthia Burton, interim HOA president. I leaned back in my chair, laughing out loud. Shared community spaces? They were calling my lake, my private property, a communal resource. In less than 48 hours, Cynthia had somehow spun a new narrative, twisting the facts to make it sound like I was the one disrupting the neighborhood. It was bold, I'd give her that. But it was also desperate, the kind of move you make when you know you're losing but can't admit it. I called Frank, my real estate attorney, and read him the letter. He chuckled darkly. "They're trying to gaslight you, Mike," he said. "This is classic HOA nonsense. Throw around big words, make vague threats, and hope you back down. They've got nothing. So what do?" I asked, glancing at the letter again, its words practically dripping with self-righteous indignation. "Show up," Frank said. "Bring the deed, the county plat maps, and every piece of evidence you've got. I'll come with you if you want. But know this, they're not after logic. This is about pride. Cynthia's picking up where Greg left off, and she's not going to stop until she's humiliated you or herself." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Yeah, it's personal now." The days leading up to the hearing were tense. I spent hours organizing my evidence, deed, survey maps, photos of the trash the HOA had left behind, even footage from the dock cameras showing Greg's failed attempt to tow Liberty. I wasn't just preparing for a hearing, I was gearing up for a fight. Meanwhile, the HOA didn't let up. Another letter arrived, this one accusing me of obstructing community access to recreational resources. Then came a flyer in my mailbox announcing an emergency community fishing day on Lake Lawson, organized by Cynthia herself. The flyer was printed on glossy paper, complete with clip art of smiling fish and a bold headline, "Reclaim Our Lake." It didn't mention my name, but it didn't have to. The message was clear. They were coming for me, and they were bringing the whole neighborhood with them. Friday arrived faster than I expected. The community hall was packed, the air thick with anticipation. I'd never seen an HOA meeting draw this kind of crowd, probably 50 people, more than half the neighborhood, crammed into folding chairs or leaning against the walls. Cynthia sat at the head of a long table, flanked by 2 other board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. She was dressed like she was hosting a charity gala, blazer with gold buttons, pearl earrings, hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. Her expression was pure ice. Her eyes locked on me the moment I walked in with Frank at my side. "Mr. Lawson," she said, her voice clipped, not bothering to fake a smile. "Thank you for attending. Let's begin." I held up a hand. "I'd like to record this meeting," I said, pulling out my phone. Cynthia's lips twitched. "That won't be necessary." I smiled, calm but unyielding. "Then I'll be leaving." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Cynthia's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought she'd call my bluff. But then she waved a hand, dismissive. "Fine. Proceed." I set my phone down, hit record, and spoke clearly. "This is Michael Lawson. This recording is for personal legal protection." The room went quiet, the weight of my words settling over everyone. Cynthia cleared her throat and launched into her attack. "You have been accused of interfering with HOA activities, endangering residents with unregulated equipment, and verbally harassing community members on shared property," she said, her voice rising with each word. I raised an eyebrow. "Which property?" "The lake," she said firmly, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Interesting," I said, pulling out the folder I'd brought. I flipped it open and laid the deed on the table, its pages crisp and undeniable. "This is the deed showing I own Lake Lawson, its bed, the shoreline, and 20 feet of land in every direction from the water's edge. It predates the formation of your HOA by 12 years. I handed copies to the board members, watching their faces as they skimmed the document. Cynthia didn't even glance at it. "We believe," she continued, undeterred, "that the lake has served as an informal community gathering space for years. That makes it communal by default." The room buzzed with whispers. I leaned forward, my voice steady but sharp. "That's not how property law works. Informal use doesn't transfer ownership. I've let people fish because I'm not a tyrant. But what I got in return was trespassing, trash, threats, and your husband trying to steal my boat with a rented crane." Gasps and scattered chuckles broke out. Cynthia's face flushed, but she pressed on. "You've disrupted community harmony," she said. "Your refusal to cooperate has caused unrest." I held up a hand, cutting her off. "Your husband nearly got someone hurt. He trespassed, lied about ownership, and hired unlicensed contractors to operate heavy machinery on my lake. Now you're trying to paint me as the bad guy because I stopped him." One of the board members, a skinny guy named Ray, leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "Mrs. Burton, this deed is clear." "I don't think we have jurisdiction here." Cynthia shot him a look that could have shattered glass. "I will not let this man hold the community hostage," she snapped. "I'm not holding anyone hostage," I said, my voice rising just enough to carry. "I'm protecting what's mine. You want to talk about unrest? Let's talk about the fines you've sent me for my own dock. The letters accusing me of violating rules you made up. The fishing parties leaving beer cans in my reeds." The crowd was buzzing now, some nodding in my direction, others whispering to their neighbors. Cynthia stood, her voice shaking with anger. "Then I'll see you in civil court. We've already filed a preemptive injunction. You'll be receiving it Monday morning." I didn't flinch. "Good. If your HOA steps foot on my lake again, you'll be violating state property laws. And if you try to find me again, I'll press for harassment." The room erupted in murmurs. Cynthia's face burned red, but she didn't respond. I packed up my folder, grabbed my phone, and walked out, Frank giving me a subtle nod as we left. Outside, A few neighbors caught up to me, their voices low. "Hey, Lawson," one guy said. "We didn't know they were doing all this behind our backs. Most of us thought the lake was communal." "It's not," I said, my tone softer but firm. "But I've never had a problem with people enjoying it. Just don't trash it. That's all I've ever asked." He nodded, clapping me on the shoulder. "You need anything, let us know." It felt good, like a crack in the HOA's armor. But I knew Cynthia wasn't done. She was too stubborn, too invested in her power trip to let this go. I was right. 2 days later, I woke to the sound of boat engines roaring across the lake. I stepped onto the dock, Duke at my side, and what I saw made my stomach churn. Cynthia had gone all in, organizing her emergency community fishing day with a vengeance. Dozens of people were out on the water, kayaks, paddleboards, even a rented pontoon boat blasting pop music from a speaker system. Coolers were dumped in the shallows, beer cans already floating among the reeds. Kids jumped off my dock unsupervised, their parents too busy drinking to notice. And at the center of it all was Cynthia, standing on a floating platform, a microphone in hand, her wide-brimmed sun hat making her look like a cruise ship director. "Welcome, neighbors," she shouted, her voice amplified over the water. "Let's show that one man can't keep what belongs to us all." The crowd cheered, their voices echoing like a battle cry. But what hit me hardest was the banner. Strung between 2 trees on the public side of the lake, a massive vinyl sign fluttered in the wind. "Lake Burton, property of the people." They'd renamed my lake. My lake. The place I'd bought to heal, the place I'd poured my soul into, was now a prop in their petty rebellion. I stood there, my hands clenched, Duke's low growl mirroring my rage. It wasn't just the noise or the litter or the banner. It was the arrogance, the sheer entitlement. They thought they could rewrite reality, erase my ownership with a sign and a party. Cynthia's voice rang out again, urging everyone to reclaim their lake, and I knew I couldn't let this stand. I turned back to the cabin, opened my safe, and pulled out the documents I'd hoped I'd never need. The original zoning paperwork, environmental reports, and the water usage rights I'd filed with the county years ago. I'd spent thousands getting those papers in order, back when everyone thought I was crazy for caring about a dead lake. Now, they were my weapon. I called Frank. "They did what?" he shouted when I told him about the banner and the renamed lake. "They're throwing a block party on your property? That's not just trespassing. That's a public safety violation." "They've got 40 people out there," I said, stuffing the documents into a folder. Speakers, coolers, a floating platform. "It's a circus." Frank's voice went calm, the kind of calm that means business. "Mike, they're breaking at least 6 local laws. I'll call the county water board. You call the sheriff. And if they won't leave, it's time to shut it down." I made the calls. The sheriff's office said they'd send a deputy, but it might take time with a crowd that size. Frank got through to the county, confirming my legal right to restrict access, especially with signs of reckless behavior and littering. I grabbed a bullhorn I kept for emergencies and marched back to the dock, my blood pounding in my ears. The music was louder now, the crowd rowdier, kids splashing in the water while adults tossed cans into the reeds like it was a frat party. "Attention, everyone!" I shouted through the bullhorn, my voice cutting through the music. "This is private property. You are trespassing. This lake is privately owned and has never been under HOA jurisdiction." The crowd booed, someone yelling, "Go home, man. You can't stop a party." I held up a waterproof sign I'd made years ago, just in case. "Private lake. No public access. Trespassing enforced by law." Then I hit the kill switch. I'd installed a remote circuit box on the dock years ago for storm safety, controlling the power to anything plugged into my outlets. The HOA had hooked their speaker system and platform lights to my dock's power without permission. In an instant, the music cut off, the speakers fizzled, and Cynthia's microphone went dead. The crowd froze, confused, some shouting, "What's going on?" and "Where's the music?" I lifted the bullhorn again. "This is your final warning. Leave the lake or face legal action. The sheriff is on the way." Some people started packing up, kayaks turning toward shore, but Cynthia wasn't done. She grabbed a handheld mic connected to a backup speaker. "This man is trying to intimidate us with legal mumbo-jumbo," she shouted. "Don't give in. He doesn't own nature." I stepped forward, my voice calm but unyielding. "No, but I own this lake and I can prove it in court." The crowd murmured, some looking uneasy, others debating whether to stay. Then a loud horn blared from the lake's edge. 2 sheriff's vehicles rolled up, red and blue lights flashing, followed by a truck with the county water board seal. Cynthia's face went white. Deputies stepped out, addressing the crowd. "You're on private property," they said. "Leave now or face fines or arrest." Within 15 minutes, the lake was nearly empty. People paddled off, grumbling but compliant, their coolers and chairs abandoned in their haste. Cynthia stood her ground, snapping at the county rep, "This is tyranny. He can't kick the community off a lake we've used for years." The rep, a woman with a no-nonsense clipboard, held up a map. "Mrs. Burton, this lake is wholly owned by Mr. Lawson. You've received cease and desist notices. You're trespassing, and this unsanctioned event opens the HOA to liability and environmental citations." Cynthia's world was crumbling, but she wouldn't admit it. "You can't do this," she whispered. I stepped beside the officer. "I didn't want this. I never minded fishing or kids swimming, but you crossed the line. Again and again." She glared at me. "You embarrassed my husband." "No," I said. "He embarrassed himself." The deputies escorted Cynthia to a patrol car for a formal statement, not an arrest, but close enough to sting. The county rep handed me a clipboard. "The lake's closed for investigation," she said. "You have full authority to press charges for property damage and unauthorized use." I nodded, watching the banner come down, the trash being cleared, the party unraveling like a bad dream. But I knew this wasn't over. Cynthia's pride was wounded, and wounded pride doesn't quit. 3 days later, a new notice was nailed to my gate, this one thicker, angrier. The HOA was suing me for emotional distress, disruption of community activity, and deliberate humiliation. Cynthia's name was at the top, but 7 other homeowners had signed on, people I'd waved to, shared firewood with, thought were decent. They claimed my ownership of the lake created a hostile living environment. It wasn't a lawsuit, it was a tantrum in legal form. I called Frank, who laughed when he read the filing. "This is a joke, Mike. They've got no case, but they can make your life hell. They're not trying to win, they're trying to wear you down." I leaned against the dock railing, watching Duke chase a butterfly, the lake sparkling under the midday sun. "So what do? We hit back," Frank said. "Not with anger, but with truth. Every record, every video, every incident. We don't just defend, we expose." Over the next few weeks, we built our case. I handed over everything: the deed, survey maps, police reports, HOA letters, dock footage, even photos of trash from their fishing events. I stayed quiet, avoiding HOA meetings and the community app, ignoring the glares from Cynthia's loyalists. But something shifted. Neighbors started showing up at my cabin, quietly, almost secretly. Nancy, a retired teacher, brought a lemon pie and an apology. "Cynthia said you were hoarding the lake," she said. I didn't know the truth. Jordan, a young dad, came next. "We don't want to be part of this lawsuit," he said. "Can I sign something to say we're out?" Others followed, one by one, peeling away from Cynthia's side, tired of the drama, tired of being lied to. It felt like the tide was turning, but I wasn't naive. Cynthia was still out there, scheming, and she wasn't alone. The court date arrived, a crisp morning that felt like a reckoning. Frank and I walked into the county courthouse, him in a navy suit, me with a folder of evidence. Cynthia sat across the aisle, her lawyer whispering in her ear, her arms crossed like she was holding back a storm. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, called the case, Burton et al. Versus Lawson, regarding property disputes and claims of community disruption. Cynthia's lawyer went first, throwing out buzzwords, intimidation, public disrespect, abuse of resources like he was auditioning for a TV drama. The judge's expression didn't change. Then Frank stood, calm and methodical, presenting our case. He showed the deed, the HOA's lack of jurisdiction, the sheriff's reports, the county's confirmation of my ownership. He played a clip from the dock cameras, Greg shouting, "We'll have it towed," just before his splash into the lake. The courtroom snorted. Then Frank played Cynthia's voice from the fishing day, loud and clear. "Let's show that one man can't keep what belongs to us all." The judge raised a hand. "That's enough." She looked at Cynthia. "It's clear Mr. Lawson owns the lake. He has every right to deny access. The HOA overstepped repeatedly, and the plaintiffs have failed to present any valid claim of harm. This case was filed out of personal resentment, not legal foundation." She paused, her eyes sharp. "Case dismissed. I advise the HOA to reconsider its leadership practices before further damage is done." Cynthia's jaw dropped, her lawyer scrambling to pack up. Frank grinned at me. "Told you." Outside, a reporter approached, mic in hand. "Mr. Lawson, a message for the community?" I nodded. I never wanted to shut anyone out. I just wanted peace and respect. Kindness goes a long way. This lake's mine, but it was never meant to be just for me, unless you try to steal it. The camera guy chuckled. By the time I got home, the HOA group chat was imploding. Cynthia resigned, blaming stress and betrayal. Greg was laying low and the board was pushing for reforms. But Cynthia wasn't done. A week later, I got a call from Frank. "She's gone to the state level," he said. "Found an activist group, the Environmental Stewardship Coalition. They're accusing you of polluting the lake and restricting ecological access." I stared out at the lake, its surface calm, its beauty undeniable. "Let them come," I said. "I'm ready." Cynthia thought she could bury me with new allies, but she was about to learn what Greg already knew. You don't mess with a man who's fought for his peace and won. The courthouse victory should have been the end of it. Cynthia Burton's lawsuit against me for emotional distress and community disruption had been thrown out, her claims exposed as the petty vendetta they were. The judge's words still echoed in my head. This case was filed out of personal resentment, not legal foundation. I'd walked out of that courtroom with Frank, my attorney, grinning beside me, the weight of the HOA's nonsense finally lifting. Lake Lawson was mine, undeniably, and the neighborhood was starting to see the truth. Neighbors who'd once glared at me now waved, some even stopping by with apologies or small gestures of support, a pie, a note, a quiet we didn't know. For a fleeting moment, I let myself believe the war was over. I was wrong. Cynthia wasn't done, and what came next made everything before look like a warm-up. It started with a new kind of attack, one I hadn't seen coming. A few days after the court ruling, I noticed strangers walking my shoreline, wearing bright green vests and carrying clipboards. They weren't HOA members, they were too professional, too focused. I watched from the cabin's porch, Duke's ears perked, as they took water samples and snapped photos of the reeds I'd spent years replanting. My gut told me this wasn't random. I grabbed my jacket and walked down to confront them, Duke trotting beside me. "Morning," I said, keeping my tone neutral but firm. "Mind telling me what you're doing on my property?" A young woman in one of the vests looked up, her expression polite but guarded. "I'm Sophie, with the Environmental Stewardship Coalition," she said. "We're investigating reports of pollution and restricted ecological access to this lake." I blinked, the words hitting me like a slap. "Pollution? Restricted access? Who reported that?" She hesitated, glancing at her clipboard. "Community members. We've been told this lake is a vital natural resource being blocked from public use." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so blatantly Cynthia's handiwork. "Let me guess," I said. "Cynthia Burton sent you. The same woman who's been dumping beer cans in my reeds and throwing parties on my dock without permission." Sophie's face stayed neutral, but I saw a flicker of doubt. "We're just here to verify the claims," she said. If you'd like, you can show us your side. I nodded, sensing an opportunity. Fine. Let's take a walk. I gave Sophie and her team a tour of Lake Lawson, showing them the bee garden I'd planted to protect pollinators, the fish habitats I'd built from submerged crates, the water purification filters I'd installed to keep the runoff clean. I pointed out the native grasses I'd replanted to stop erosion, the trash I'd hauled out after HOA events, the hours I'd spent keeping this lake alive. Sophie took notes, her pen moving faster with every step. By the end, she looked at me, her voice softer. Honestly, you're doing more conservation work than most public parks I've visited. I shrugged. It's my home. I take care of it. She nodded, but the investigation continued. Cynthia had found a new weapon in the coalition, feeding them a story about me as a greedy recluse hoarding a natural resource. She went door to door, gathering signatures for a petition to designate Lake Lawson a protected community landmark, despite its private ownership. She wrote letters to the local paper, painting me as a villain who cared more about property lines than the environment. The public started turning again, cold stares at the grocery store, anonymous notes in my mailbox. One, taped to my gate with duct tape, read, "Nature belongs to everyone." I stayed calm, documenting everything, but the pressure was mounting. Cynthia's campaign was relentless, and the coalition's presence made it feel like the walls were closing in. Then, something unexpected happened. Sophie came back, not with a clipboard, but with a camera crew. "We want to do a feature," she said. "Highlight what you're doing here. Set the record straight." I hesitated, wary of the spotlight, but Frank urged me to do it. "This is your chance, Mike," he said. "Show the world who you are." So we filmed. I walked them through the lake's story, how I'd bought it after my divorce to heal, how it had pulled me through the darkest days of my life, how I'd never charged anyone to fish or swim, but only asked for respect. They captured Duke bounding through the grass, kids from the neighborhood helping me clean the shoreline, the bee garden buzzing with life. When the story aired, it was like a dam breaking. The headline read, "The man behind Lake Lawson, the quiet steward of a community oasis." It spread online, shared by locals, then strangers, then people I'd never met. The narrative flipped. People who'd ignored me started waving again. A local school asked to bring students for an environmental field day. The mayor sent a letter thanking me for preserving one of our region's most beautiful and responsibly maintained natural sites. The coalition quietly dropped their complaint. Sophie emailed me, saying she'd resigned from the group. "It wasn't what I thought it was," she wrote. Cynthia went silent, her petitions fizzling, her letters to the editor unanswered. For a while, I thought it was truly over. Then, one night around midnight, I woke to the sound of tires spinning in gravel. I bolted upright, Duke already growling at the door. I grabbed a flashlight, slipped on my boots, and stepped outside in my robe, the cold air biting my skin. Duke's hackles were up, his eyes locked on the edge of the lake. I followed his gaze and froze. A flatbed trailer with a backhoe was parked near my gate, its headlights flickering in the darkness. And standing beside it, covered in mud and holding a gas can, was Greg Burton. For a split second, I couldn't believe it. Greg, the former HOA president, the man who'd fallen into my lake and lost everything, was back, wild-eyed and shaking. Duke snarled, and I held him back, my heart pounding. "Greg," I called out, my voice steady despite the adrenaline. "Step away from the equipment. Drop the gas can." He froze, our eyes locking in the dim light. "This was supposed to be mine," he spat, his voice raw with rage. "That lake was ours." "You lost, Greg," I said, stepping closer. "You don't have to do this." "She ruined everything," he screamed, his words slurring slightly. "The HOA, my career, my name, and you. You made me a joke." I flicked on the floodlights, the shoreline blazing to life. That's when I saw the trailer's cargo, several large drums, not just gas, but fertilizer mixed with fuel. Explosive. My blood ran cold. "Greg," I said slowly, "what were you planning to do?" He didn't answer. Instead, he lunged for the backhoe's lever. I sprinted forward, Duke barking and charging past me. Greg's hand grazed the lever before I tackled him, pinning him to the muddy grass. He thrashed, yelling, fueled by fury and madness, but I held him down, my knees digging into the earth. Within 5 minutes, red and blue lights lit up the sky. Sheriff's deputies pulled me off, cuffed Greg, and hauled him to his feet. He screamed the whole way to the cruiser, "You think you've won? I'll be back." The deputies inspected the trailer, their faces grim. "Fertilizer and fuel," one muttered, calling for a hazmat team. I caught my breath, explaining what I'd seen. They nodded, their radios crackling with urgency. Greg's plan, investigators later confirmed, was to dig into the lake's filtration beds and dump the toxic mix to poison the water, making it uninhabitable. He wanted to destroy what he couldn't control, to leave me with nothing to fight for. But thanks to Duke, the floodlights, and a well-timed tackle, he'd failed. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The local news exploded, calling it attempted eco-terrorism. Greg faced federal charges, his name plastered across headlines. Cynthia vanished, moving out of the neighborhood within a week. Rumors swirled she'd filed for divorce, changed her name, left town for good. The HOA went quiet, holding a vote 6 months later to overhaul its leadership. A few neighbors even asked me to join the board. I declined with a smile. "I don't need power," I said. "I just want peace." Over the next year, Lake Lawson thrived. The county granted me funds to establish a wildlife sanctuary around the shoreline. Schools brought kids out each spring to learn about conservation. Photographers flocked to capture the sunrise, its golden light dancing across the water. Neighbors returned, not as invaders, but as guests, fishing or swimming with my permission, always cleaning up after. I put up a sign at the dock's entrance, carved into cedar, "Welcome to Lake Lawson. Respect the land, the water, and each other." Below, in smaller letters, "This isn't a rule. It's a reminder." Duke still sits by the dock most evenings, his eyes scanning the horizon like the guardian he is. Sometimes, I think about Greg and Cynthia, about how far people will go to cling to control over things that were never theirs. Their obsession with power blinded them to the simple truth: peace isn't taken, it's built, one ripple at a time. Lake Lawson isn't just mine because I fought for it, it's mine because I loved it, cared for it, gave it a second life when no one else would. And in doing so, I found my own. This lake has seen it all: trespassers, lawsuits, even a madman with a gas can. But it's still here, calm and alive, a mirror for the world's beauty and its battles. If you're ever out this way, come by. Cast a line, watch the ducks, feel the breeze. Just respect the water, and we'll get along fine. Because out here, on the shores of Lake Lawson, we don't fight for control. We fight for something better, a place to call home, a peace worth protecting, and a story that proves no one can steal what you've earned with heart and grit. So here's to the lake, to Duke, to every battle won, and to the ripples that keep spreading long after the stones have sunk.